Have you ever wondered what an executor of a will does and if you even need one? What kind of bills do you need to pay after you're gone? And what can your executor do with that information? Well, today we've got Attorney Joseph Marra out of Yonkers, New York. He is going to answer questions on this very topic, so tune in.
Well, trustees and executors, the trustee is the one who handles trust funds. The executor is the one who basically gathers the assets of the estate, pays the estate bills, and distributes the money. They are both held to the highest fiduciary standards under the law. Now, does that mean there are people who haven't been dishonest? Of course, there are people who've been dishonest and stolen money. Some people like to have this supervised by the courts, and that's why they have a testamentary trust set up so that at least while the children are minors, the trustee is compelled to submit an accounting to the court. Accounting being, this is the money that came in, this is the money that went out, this is how he spent it, this is how he invested it. They're compelled to account to the court. Some people like that oversight, other people find it an unnecessary burden, and they purposely do not have trusts set up that are testamentary trusts. Another thing people do is they use institutional trustees, trust companies, banks. They'll use them as the trustee. So let's say you have quite a bit of money and you don't want the guardian of your children to have control over this money. So you might go to ABC Trust Company or ABC Bank and name them as trustee. And then the guardian of your children will have to go to the trustee and say, hey, I want money for X, Y, and Z, and justify it to the trustee. Or it doesn't have to be an institution, it could be another independent person who fills that role. So you could divide these roles up. You can have different executors, different trustees, different guardians, or you can wrap them all up into one person. That's really your choice. How large is your estate? Does it make sense to have all these multiple people around if you only have a couple of $100,000 in your estate? I would argue it's not. Okay. Number two, who are the parties involved? Who are the people? What are their relationships? If you feel that you have a sibling who's very strong and your child respects them, and you feel that this person is sophisticated and reliable and honest, you might want to name them. Or maybe your relatives don't want to get involved in this. They feel uncomfortable. Well, then you might want to look to name an institutional trustee when you have this kind of money. There's no one size fits all. This is really depends on your individual circumstances, your feelings, how you feel about this, the parties involved, the amount of money involved, whether your child is one with special needs or not, whether your child is responsible or not. These are all factors that have to be considered in making these decisions. The judge will rule on the validity of the will and issue what's called letters testamentary to your named executor. What does that do? It gives your named executor the power to go wherever your assets are held, gather those assets, pay your bills, and then distribute them. For example, if you said, I leave all my assets to my 3 children, and you name your brother as your executor, well, your brother would take the will, submit it to the court for probate. Assuming no objections, no problems, the court issues letters testamentary to your brother. He then goes around and sends letters to all your banks, wherever you had stock, and say, hey, I'm the executor, I'm gathering the assets. They will then make out, transfer the assets to the estate. And then your brother, after paying the bills that you left, plus the expenses associated with administering the estate, whatever's left will be divided up among the beneficiaries. And let's just talk about bills associated with the administration of the estate. Well, attorneys get paid. Okay. Court costs. There are costs associated with filing the wills, so you have to pay those. Executors are entitled to a commission. They can choose to waive it, but they are entitled to it. It's a statutory commission, meaning it's It's enacted by statute. It's 5% of the first 100,000 of probate assets. And then it's a sliding scale downward all the way down to 2.5%, but it's 4% of the next 500,000, and then a sliding scale downward. So those expenses have to be paid. What other expenses? Well, taxes. Did you pay your income taxes? There's also estate taxes potentially. Now that's not as big of an issue as it used to be, but let's talk about that now. What the government does, they take a snapshot of what you're worth, and then they impose a tax on it. Now, your executor has a choice of picking the day you die or 6 months after you die as to when that snapshot's going to be used. For example, I mean, when COVID hit, the stock market crashed, right, for a number of weeks. So let's say you died 6 months before the lowest point in the stock market and you had a lot of stock. Well, it would make sense for your executor to pick that 6 months after you die as the alternate valuation date, because your stock portfolio probably decreased by close to a third. So it would be smart to pick that date. So, but generally speaking, it's the date of death. And this snapshot of what you're worth, how much they tax, when do they start taxing? Well, the federal government, the taxes changed significantly. Now we're over $11 million before the federal government starts to tax it. Closer to $12 million. And that goes up every year. And couples can shelter double that. And it doesn't take a lot of exotic planning for couples to do that. That's on the federal level. New York State is different. New York State, 5.75 million is where they start taxing. And that you do have to do some planning. So a lot of people have heard, well, you know, I have $8 million. I don't have to worry about estate taxes. No, you do. You have New York State estate tax. New York State tax is a little nasty because there's something called a cliff, meaning they don't start taxing you until you're $5.75 million. But once you go over a certain limit, they start taxing you from $1, I should say. So it's very important to plan for your New York State estate tax. Just don't focus on federal, because it takes a nice little bite out of you too. So those are the things you have to consider. So once again, you pay off your debts associated with your last illness. Your attorney who's handling the affairs get paid. The executor gets his commission. Estate taxes, if need be, get paid. And what's left gets divided up among the heirs named in the will. And there also might be something called estate income taxes, because you can die, but your assets are still there. They don't get distributed right away, and they're gaining income. You might have stocks that are paying dividends. Well, somebody has to pay tax on that money too. So that's something else that has to be considered.